Welcome to the AlpMomentum podcast. Chas, very happy to have you here.
Fantastic. Thank you for the invite.
So I was really so excited to talk to you after our last discussion, which was really inspiring. And also, of course, congratulations to your great ranking and achievement in the Redstone study on universities and entrepreneurship. Oxford is really a European-wide kind of highlight in the area of how to transfer all the great knowledge and education into startups. But before we dive in there, maybe you can share a little bit about your background. And I think you have a very interesting and probably also very kind of unusual path and career so far. So it would be great to hear a little bit how that came along.
Sure. Well, I mean, I was in Oxford in the mid-80s, and then in 88 I joined Glaxo, the pharmaceutical company here in the UK. The reason I did that was because I was very excited about potentially doing research which was translated, which was going to change the lives of patients, which was going to help generate new medicines, etc. So I went into Glaxo. I was there for 19 years. It became Glaxo Wellcome, then GlaxoSmithKline. And frankly, Michael, I learned so much in that organization. I learned so much about drug discovery. I learned about sort of the challenges with sort of animal models. I learned about sort of commercial challenges, regulatory challenges. But I also learned a lot of softer skills around sort of teamwork and, leadership and management and so on and so forth. So I had an absolutely awesome time there, actually. I absolutely loved it. I then came back to Oxford in 2008, partly because I was increasingly worried that in the pharmaceutical industry, lots of companies were working on the same thing in parallel, in secret. And most of these ideas fail. They don't make it to the clinic or they don't make it to the marketplace. So there was a lot of duplication. I was also concerned that it was hard when you were working in industry. This is now, early part of this century. It was harder to access lots of clinicians. It was also hard to access lots of patient material. And it was also hard to influence the regulators if you're sitting inside a pharma company. And so I came back to Oxford in 2008, determined to sort of try and drive innovation in drug discovery. So I did that for many years. I grew an organization called the Structural Genomics Consortium, which became arguably one of the most successful public-private partnerships in drug discovery. And then I got more and more excited about sort of some of the big global challenges that we're facing. This isn't just healthcare, it's climate, it's food production, it's energy, it's all of that stuff, etc. And I realized that the beauty of this place, Oxford that is that it's full of some incredible talent. I mean, we have very, very talented students and very, very talented researchers and some incredible faculty. And of course, that's the starting point for everything. And, we've got some awesome leaders. We've got brilliant researchers. But if we're going to deliver on some of these big global challenges, then what we need is great entrepreneurs. And so I often say to my colleagues here that across the world, there are millions of researchers, but very few of those researchers are leaders, and few of those researchers are true innovators, and few of those researchers are entrepreneurs. And I think we need more leaders and innovators and entrepreneurs basically to change the world. And so, in this great university, we've got colleagues working in all of those spaces, etc. So I hope that was of interest.
Wow, what a great statement. Maybe, of course, I assume most or everybody will have heard of Oxford, but probably not so many know exactly like how big is it, how many students are there, how is it structured? Maybe you can give a few facts about Oxford to start with.
To be fair, Michael, it's not a big university. It's actually one of the smaller universities. We now do have more graduate students than we have undergraduate students. The university is it's broken into sort of four broad divisions. One is the medical sciences division. We like to think we've got arguably the best medical school in the world. We've got amazing strengths in physics and chemistry and engineering and data science and computational science. So that's another division called maths, physics, and life sciences. And then we've got two divisions called social sciences and humanities. And of course, in Oxford, we've got great breadth and depth in all of those areas, etc. So I like to think that Oxford is a university that is both very broad, covering all disciplines, but it's also very deep as well. So, and this is why I love the place actually. I mean, it's just full of great students and great researchers and great faculty. And that's a starting point for everything we do.
Absolutely. Maybe what do you, I mean, why is Oxford so great? In a sense, what does set it apart from other institutions, or what does it differently, or how has maybe the history been differently?
Well, I would say maybe two things. I thought about this a lot during the pandemic because often I was asked a question by journalists or media, etc. Why was Oxford on the news on a daily basis? And at least in the UK, it was during the pandemic. And it wasn't always Oxford faculty talking about it. It was usually politicians talking about it and what we were doing around creating the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine or the recovery trial, etc., etc. And so I often thought to myself, why is Oxford on the news on a daily basis? I mean, Harvard wasn't, Stanford wasn't, Cambridge UK wasn't, et cetera, et cetera. And I came to two broad conclusions. I think in Oxford, my sense is maybe we're a bit more collaborative. There's a recognition that across the world we're facing some massive challenges, and we in Oxford can't tackle them on our own. And we have to work with industry. We have to work with governments. We have to work with regulators. We have to work with funders. We have to work with our peer institutions. And frankly, we have to work with other countries because all these challenges are global, etc. I think the other thing I would say about Oxford, and the reason I love this place and I wouldn't work anywhere else, and I've been here since 2008, is I frankly, Michael, I'm having a whale of a time, partly because my colleagues are so helpful and supportive and positive and generous. Many, many, many senior colleagues in this university have given up their time to help me with my aspirations or ideas, etc., etc. And here I'm thinking of, brilliant people like John Bell, our former Regius Professor of Medicine, Louise Richardson, who was our former Vice-Chancellor, Peter Ratcliffe, who got the Nobel Prize a few years ago. He was my boss essentially for more than a decade. But other colleagues, Mark Feldman, Kay Davis, Andy Carr, John Geddes, etc. Now Irene Tracy, and so on and so forth. I mean, honestly, Graham Russell. I mean, I could just go on. And all of these colleagues, they, I think they just care about, they recognize that Oxford's a great place and we've got great people, but the world is facing some big challenges, and we in Oxford have to contribute to solutions for those challenges. And we've got a great brand name, we've got great convening power, we've got phenomenal alumni. I mean, 600,000 of our alumni are spread all over the world. Many of them, most of them, are incredibly successful, and they all want to help us tackle some of these big global challenges. So it's an amazing place.
I mean, you name many legends in their fields. How do you keep and foster such a thriving research environment?
I think sort of I mean, everybody just wants to be treated well, don't they? And sort of, Oxford's a nice place to live. You're surrounded by great people. We have a good number of resources. Um, you know, I can share with you recent figures. I mean, sort of, this university is now bringing in £1 billion a year of research funding. Now,
Oh
that's more than
wow.
any university in this country by a considerable margin. We also get more industry funding than any other university in this country. We also get more philanthropic funding than any other university in this country. And I think it's still true to say that we get probably more VC funding, venture capital funding, than any other university in the country. So that's a great place. So if you've got great people and they're coming up with great ideas, and we've got alumni spread all over the world, and we've got considerable networks in industry and government, and et cetera, and we've got great convening power and a great brand name, we can do anything actually. And then you've seen what my friend Adrian Hill has done. I mean, he became a legend in the pandemic because he worked with Sarah Gilbert and Andrew Pollard, and they came up with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine for COVID-19. But just recently, you will have heard what he's done around malaria, and he's devoted his life to that. That vaccine now, which has been released, is going to save 600,000 lives in the continent of Africa every year. And, this is going to be even bigger than the COVID vaccine. And, Adrian has been here all his life. Many of these people I've mentioned, they've devoted their lives to this place. Our current Vice-Chancellor, Irene Tracy, she was an undergraduate student here. She did her DPhil here. She did a postdoc here. She became head of a department, a head of a research institute, a head of a college, and now she's the vice chancellor. I think she's only spent 2 years outside the university when she was at Harvard doing a postdoc, etc. And, so people stay. They stay because it's a great place to do research. It's a great place to teach. It's a great place to create impact. We help each other. We support each other. There's so much that needs doing. And I can't think of a better place to do it from.
That sounds very inspiring, actually, and I agree. Like, if you have great people, that attracts other great people and is inspiring and creates this positive spiral. You mentioned like teaching. Maybe can you share? Like, obviously, Oxford is this century-old institution. How has teaching changed to the students, or what innovations have you introduced? Anything that you are particularly proud of? And maybe to add on that, what do you make so you stay still relevant in today's society with all the online opportunities, AI opportunities?
I mean, of course, the university and parts of it are sort of 900 years old. I mean, it's not 1 century; it's several centuries, etc. I think that the biggest USP of this place is, as we have 39 colleges, and in each of those colleges, Michael, it may be 500 or 600 faculty and students in those colleges and staff. But the point is, in each of those colleges, these small communities of 500, 600, you have undergraduates, you have postgraduates, you have postdocs, you have faculty, but these are colleagues from all disciplines. These are students from all disciplines. There could be medics and engineers, there could be humanities people, social scientists, people in the business school, people doing physics or data science or whatever. And all of them, essentially, they live together, they work together, they play together, and they form great relations which stay throughout their lives. I think that these small communities of interdisciplinary, all disciplines coming together, living together, I think that's a real secret sauce. I think the other secret sauce is, we do small group face-to-face tutorial teaching. So, all the undergraduate students, they are taught in tutorials, and they have the lectures in the departments, but they have tutorials which are small group. They could be 2 students, they could be 5 or 6 students, but they're small groups, intense, face to face. And, in those sorts of, I've been a tutor in that situation. You really understand each student in detail. You understand what their strengths are, you understand what their weaknesses are, you understand what they're struggling with, and you can help them with what they're struggling with. But you can also ensure that they can have whatever view they want, but they've got to be able to defend it, and they've got to be able to argue it, and they've got to be able to communicate it, etc., etc. So it's a I think a brilliant teaching experience. I mean, it's a brilliant learning experience. I can't think of anything better, actually.
Yeah, it sounds like it is very different to some of the universities where you basically have a professor just talking in front of hundreds of students and you barely get to meet him. Maybe now let's switch to entrepreneurship. Maybe you can share some of the success stories of startups and companies that emerged out of Oxford.
Let me just share with you some of the things our faculty have done, and because I think that's incredibly impressive. And so this is sort of spin-out companies that have been created with sort of university IP, if you like. So in 2021, this university had a total research income of 875 million. Now, that was more than any other university in the country. That year, Michael, we created 31 companies.
So, sorry, could you repeat that?
2021, we had total research income of 875 million. That year, we produced 31 companies, commercial enterprises, but also social enterprises. That was more than any university on the planet. That particular year, our companies attracted 1.4 billion of VC funding. And would you believe it, the rest of the UK attracted 1.2 billion. So we had more than half the VC money coming into the country that year. That was 2021. Let me share with you what happened in 2022, and I'll mention some of the individuals as well. So my friend Matthew Wood IPO'd one of his companies, PepGen, for 108 million. Carol Robinson, who's an absolute genius, set up this company, OMAS, a few years ago. She raised 100 million. Oslo raised 100 million. Richard Cornell, who's the head of our Nuffield Department of Clinical Medicine, he sold his company, Miro Bio, to Gilead for 405 million. A couple of our students set up an antibody company called DJS, and they sold that to AbbVie for 255 million. And Nucleome attracted 36 million of funding. That was 2022. 2023, Ultromix got FDA approval. Caristo raised 16 million. And Bob McLaren, who's an absolute genius, he's an ophthalmologist working on rare eye diseases, etc., and looking at gene therapy. He created a company called Beacon Therapeutics, which raised 96 million seed fund. And, I think that must be the largest seed fund ever in Europe, etc. So that was 2023. And I've just shared with you earlier about sort of this year, 24, we're now hitting £1 billion a year of research income, where we get more industry income than any university, we get more philanthropic income, and I believe we've got more VC income as well. So, honestly, the numbers speak for themselves and the individuals. But I think for me, the important thing now is, Michael, in Oxford, I keep saying to colleagues, we're going through a cultural revolution. I think it started in 2015 when we created this fund called Oxford Science Innovation, now called Oxford Science Enterprise. Initially, it was £614 million, but importantly, that fund was purely for Oxford faculty and Oxford researchers. It wasn't anywhere else. Now, that was the largest fund aligned to any one university on the planet. I mean, Harvard didn't have it, Stanford didn't have it. Now, prior to that fund, I think as a university, we were creating only 4 or 5 companies a year. As soon as we did that, it went to more than 20. Now, as a consequence of that fund, we have 300 plus companies sitting on the periphery of Oxford that are growing, they're attracting talent, they're scaling up, they're working on all sorts of problems that we've talked about, et cetera, et cetera. But importantly now, we've got some academics now in the university who are serial entrepreneurs. They're on their 3rd or 4th company. And so that's produced a massive culture change, because now many students and many researchers and many faculty look at those individuals and think, well, if they can do it, we can do it. So we're seeing a real change in culture. I think during the pandemic, we saw another step change in culture. Many people saw, if you work with industry, you work with government, you work with regulators, you work with funders, you can create massive impact. You can create a vaccine that will go into 3.5 billion arms and get the world out of a pandemic. I mean, I can't think of a bigger impact than that. And in that, of course, in the pandemic, my colleagues Martin Landray and Peter Horby, they set up that recovery trial, which was basically using NHS resources and patients to rapidly test if existing drugs had any efficacy against COVID-19. And they found that dexamethasone was effective. And apparently that finding alone saved more than 1 million lives across the planet, etc. So that produced a culture change about to tackle these big problems, we need to work together. That's the important thing. And we need to work globally and think globally, etc. With the vaccine, of course, we partnered with AstraZeneca, but we also partnered with the Serum Research Institute in India, because they can make vaccines cheaper than anybody else on the planet, etc. So that was massively impactful. I also understand actually that our vaccine saved more lives than either the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine. So this is incredible impact. I've just shared with you the story with malaria, etc. So I think these things have produced another culture change. The next culture change is going to happen in the next 18 months. So you're probably aware that Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, has moved to Oxford. And he's putting up a couple of buildings. He's spending £1 billion on the buildings. They're going to be the best labs in the country. He's worth, 180 billion or whatever, et cetera, et cetera. He wants to change the world. And he's happy to spend all that money to do that. He's concentrating on 4 areas: healthcare, climate, food production, and governance and democracy, etc. All areas that we're working on in the university. So now we're establishing sort of big projects and partnerships, etc., to sort of drive that stuff forward. And importantly, my hero John
Sorry,
Bell.
could you repeat? He is working on 4 areas.
Yeah, the 4 areas broadly are healthcare, climate, food production, and then governance and democracy, etc. But the other thing is that sort of John Bell, who's done so much for this great university, he was the Regius Professor of Medicine. He's now stepped down as Regius, but now he's become the president of the Ellison Institute here in Oxford. And so we're working closely with John to think about sort of what we can do together to change the world. So I think this is going to be, this is going to produce another step change in Oxfordshire. The other thing I should say, Michael, I'm particularly excited about is that, in Oxfordshire now, I mean, obviously we've got the university, we've got the 300 companies we've created, we've got the science parks that are growing, but just a few miles south of Oxford, there are 2 major national infrastructures at Harwell and Culham. And there's so much expertise, the Diamond Light Synchrotron, energy, the Rosalind Franklin Institute, et cetera, lots of expertise in space and satellite. So in this region now, in Oxfordshire, we have got clusters in a number of areas. We've obviously got massive strengths in life sciences, but we've got strengths in space and satellite. We've got strengths in AI and quantum. We've got strengths in autonomous vehicles and robotics and motorsport. We've got strengths in publishing. We've got strengths in fusion energy. There are not many places on the planet that have got so many clusters. So when you think we've got great people, lots of clusters, a really vibrant atmosphere, lots of role models, alumni all over the world, great networks, great convening power. I mean, it's a magical place to be.
I love how big and how visionary you and the university thinks. I think that's very unusual. Maybe you can share a bit, like, a parts of what I got is you have obviously great people, you have big ambitions, really, like, how can you massively change the world for greater and for good. You have this fund, which is truly impressive. What else? What other support structures do you have? What do you do to foster entrepreneurship, both within faculty as well as within your student body?
I've already mentioned role models. And, Michael, I mean, sort of, all of our lives are usually shaped by sort of people we admire and our role models, etc. I can speak for myself, sort of throughout my life, I've had great teachers and great supervisors and great mentors, etc. And I mentioned many of my mentors here in the university, etc. So that's what's really important. Some of the things we are doing, I mean, sort of, my colleague Olga Kozlova is looking after a program called Inspire, working with colleagues in the business school, Thomas Hellman. So this is a program to help students and early career researchers learn about entrepreneurship, learn about how to write business plans, learn about how to interact with venture capitalists, etc., etc. So we're doing that. In terms of faculty, one of the things we did about 3-4 years ago, we wanted to speed up the process of creating these companies, and we wanted to incentivize the academics. So we created a process which was around sort of how much equity the university took in spin-outs created by our academics. And so basically we had created simple rules. If the university has made a contribution, so we paid the academic salary, we paid for postdocs or students or infrastructure. In that case, we'll take a 20% equity and the academic gets 80. If the university's made no contribution, no salary, no postdocs, no students, no infrastructure, then we'll take 10% and the academic gets 90%. So it's trying to incentivize the academics, but importantly, it's binary, it's transparent. There's no negotiation, it's fast. It's either 80-20 or it's 90-10. And so that's been really step changing. I should also say, Michael, I still get some colleagues being critical, saying, oh, we need to be more like MIT, Stanford. They take 5% or 3%. Now, that's not factually completely correct, because the thing is, our 20% gets diluted with progressive funding rounds, such that when you get to Series A, B, the university's stake in the company is usually about 5 or 3%. The 5 or 3% that I get quoted at me from MIT, Stanford, those are fixed. They are not diluted, etc. So actually, our 20% diluted is comparable to what MIT, Stanford are doing. So it's not a completely fair. So those are some of the things we're doing to help the students and some of the things to help the faculty. I think there's a recognition, Michael, and I know you fully appreciate this. This great university, of course, it has to train the next generation. Of course, we have to be a research powerhouse. But absolutely now, society, patients, industry, governments, the world is looking to universities like this to not just do research and publish papers, but to create impact with that research, is to create solutions to some of these big global challenges. So this third agenda has become incredibly important.
This is a very strong statement, I think, which so far, unfortunately, is not yet shared by all the universities in Europe. What you're essentially saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Oxford now has entrepreneurship as a third column next to research and teaching.
Absolutely. And
Would you agree with that statement?
no, absolutely. And you know, even our Vice-Chancellor is going around saying that now. So absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I think it's important.
I,
I do
I love it
absolutely.
because so far universities, I mean, most of them are good or really great at research, creating all the ideas and the IP. Then you educate people. But what has been neglected or not taken care of so much is what do you do with that?
Yeah.
And the effort I think you have to do to create companies is considerably less than what you have to do to create this infrastructure for all the research and teaching. Um,
Well, I absolutely believe that in future, more and more, the reputation of a university is going to be dependent on the impact it's had on the local community or on the nation or on the world, etc. The reason Oxford was absolutely up there in the pandemic, it was because, you know, we created the vaccine, we found the dexamethasone finding, etc., etc. And you know, you know, Michael, I mean, you know, I've said this in public many times. I don't mind saying it again. I'm a little bit envious of Stanford because, you know, now on the doorstep of Stanford, there are 6 companies, each worth more than $1 trillion. Now, in Europe, we have no company worth $1 trillion. So those companies are Microsoft 3.3, Apple 3.2, Nvidia 3.2, Alphabet, Google is 2.3, Amazon's 2, and Meta's 1.3, right? In aggregate, those companies are worth more than 15 trillion. That is nearly 5 times the GDP of this great country. Now you can imagine, one, the opportunities for kids in Stanford in those companies, and two, you can imagine the funding that they're putting into Stanford. And that's the sort of ecosystem I would like to create here in Oxford. But I think we've got some advantages. I mean, advantages we've got is we've got amazing breadth in this university, you know, in social sciences and humanities, as well as arguably, you know, one of the best medical schools on the planet, and some great strengths in sort of deep tech and AI and engineering and physics and chemistry and so on and so forth, you know, sort of.
and so, I mean, obviously huge numbers, but what do you think would need to happen also to really not only found companies, but then also to scale them further? I think that's a common topic across Europe.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to do now in the next few years, I'm trying to bring in more investors into our ecosystem because, frankly, the funding we've got isn't enough to fund even all the companies we want to start up, leave aside, grow them and scale them up, etc. You know, for me, the important thing is we help some of these companies grow to sort of 50, 100 billion, etc., trillion, because that's when they really change the world. You know, these companies I've mentioned, they haven't just created a handful of jobs. They have created a new industry. They've created hundreds of thousands of jobs. They've created lots of tax revenue. They've and they frankly produced quite a few millionaires, and I'm sure they produce quite a few billionaires as well. And so, you know, so we need to bring in more
So how much
investors.
money would you need to scale all the companies in Oxford that you wanted to scale?
My ambition is, Michael, at the moment we're bringing in about £1 billion a year in terms of sort of VC type funding. I'm sorry, I should have switched that off. Apologies. And my ambition is in the next 5 years, we're going to grow that to 5 billion a year. And, but you know, the conversations that we're having with some of our companies, it isn't about, oh, they need another 5 million or 10 million. The question is, how do we put in 200 million? You know, if we're going to crack fusion energy, this isn't about a handful of millions, etc. we've got to be thinking a few 100 million. And so I think that's the way we need to start thinking.
But also which is interesting that you're actually as a university are thinking that way. You're
Well,
thinking,
I absolutely think, Michael, sorry to interrupt. I mean, we need to bring in more investors. I also want to bring in more corporates, but I also want to bring in more entrepreneurs who can scale up companies. We're also putting a lot of effort into growing more innovation space. So we're working with developers, etc. And we're also putting a lot of effort into encouraging more female entrepreneurship. So more female founders, female CEOs, female C-suite, etc., etc. And like I said, one of Oxford's big strengths is social sciences and humanities. So, we're already creating a lot of social enterprises. We're putting up a new building here, a humanities building focused on AI and ethics, with 194 million donation from Steve Schwartzman, etc. I don't think any other university on the planet is investing so much in humanities. And of course, everybody's talking about AI, but everybody's also talking about safety around AI as well. So, and I think that's where Oxford is going to become a great leader.
amazing. Maybe, so I think we're nearly at the end. So to conclude, just one last question. What would you recommend other universities to do to also foster more entrepreneurship?
I think, the reason, I mean, I've often been asked the question, why is the US different to the UK? Firstly, they've got loads more money, loads more risk capital, loads more billionaires, these trillion-dollar companies. There's a lot more of an alumni giving culture. They are private institutions, whereas Oxford is not a private institute. So there's the money bit, but there's also the culture bit. And I think we have to be more ambitious. We have to go for the moonshots, because I think on the way to getting to that moonshot, we will produce some step changes, etc. So I think ambition, partnership, scale, and urgency. I mean, all these problems, Michael, be it dementia, mental health, aging, climate, energy, food, we need more scale on these problems. We need more urgency. And the way to do that is by working with partner organizations with complementary expertise or resources. I mean, that's the way to accelerate it. And that's what we're doing.
Fantastic final statement, Chas. Thank you so much for this truly amazing interview. It was a great pleasure. I also learned a lot. I love your ambition. Really, go for the moon. So thanks a lot, and all the best for the future. Absolutely. Thank you. Bye.